Hello, internet friends, and welcome to Keep the Game Moving. And this time, a little different. We're going to go with. Oh, did we lose you, Anna?
Yeah, hang on.
No worries. We can start over.
There we go.
All right. I'll just put the overlay up again, and well, it'll be like
The
it
second
never
we
happened.
started live, it was like, just kidding.
The joys of
It's really good.
technology. All
Yeah.
right. So I'll put the overlay
Take
back
two.
up. All right. Starting in 5, 4, 3. Hello again, internet friends, and welcome to Keep the Game Moving. This time, I'm super excited to be joined by I'm going to say mastermind, the mastermind behind the awesome website DnD Disability, Anna Holden. Anna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
So, give folks just a quick rundown on what DnD Disability is.
So, DnD Disability is about a couple different things. Um, First of all, uh, spreading disability awareness and inclusion in the community because there's been a big increase in that over the past few years, but it's definitely an area that we're still working on. So we're really passionate about just spreading disability inclusion and uplifting other disabled creators in the industry. And then I also make mechanics for disabilities such as chronic pain. I think we did. I'm trying to remember all the ones that
There's
I've done.
autism, there's
Awesome
ADHD.
ADHD. I think
We're
we
gonna
did.
we're gonna do
Yeah.
some drill down coming up. I think that's one of the most interesting parts.
Yeah.
So what led to this idea? Was it just looking? Was it the old story of you're looking for representation, and if you don't see it, make it yourself? Or
A little bit, yeah. So this actually started before I was like public with it, with the chronic pain mechanics, because I had been diagnosed with fibromyalgia a few months before I started doing this, and I'd been having the pain for a long time, but it was very different to have a word for it and like realize like, hey, I am disabled, and that was something to work through. And one way I started like kind of wrapping my head around that was playing a character who had chronic pain like mine. And so when I was looking to see if there was any mechanics out there for that, there were a couple of like odd things that we came across, my DM and I, but nothing that quite fit like my experience with chronic pain. So I made like a very, very basic version of what is the chronic pain mechanics now, and I used that with my character and play tested that with my character, as well as a couple other mechanics. I think it was, or supplements, which I think it was like the painkillers and such. That was all done like before I actually like announced D&D Disability as something that I was doing. And then it was kind of through that and playing that character and developing those mechanics more that I realized like, hey, there are probably other people out there who would be looking for this sort of thing like I was. And it's something that I really enjoy doing and found like a passion for doing through playing this character and creating the chronic pain mechanics. And it just kind of went from there because a couple months into having started the project, we were actually awarded the Patreon Creators Grant in 2020. So that was a huge kickstart to it. And it just kind of blew up from there.
it's interesting because for when I talk with folks about them wanting to see representation, um, this is gonna be a little bit of a broad brush, but when I talk with people of color and other groups about representation, they want to take the mechanics out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they because the point there is that we're just there's not a difference
Mm-hmm.
mechanically
Yeah.
betwixt us, but you're almost going the opposite route, and I think appropriately so. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really neat way to sort of to let folks bring disabled characters into their games, but also b to kind of give a sense of what disability means to those of us who don't have them.
Yeah. So with being disabled, you are different than someone who is able-bodied, but that's not necessarily like it's not a bad thing, which is something that I very much emphasize when I create mechanics. Is I'm not just going to give a bunch of like penalties or something because you're disabled. You also get proficiencies and different abilities and things that you're better at because, you know, like characters who have, most of them get like constitution proficiency because, I mean, if you've experienced chronic pain, generally your pain tolerance is so much higher than like the average person because you're in pain all the time. And so it's little things like that I feel is very important to stress when creating mechanics, is it's not all negatives. And I try not to use any like negative wording at all when creating them because disability is not an inherently bad thing. And
yeah, I think
so
the autism mechanics are a great example of that, where
mm,
you know you've got and I want to table the talk about your stress points mechanic because I think that's something that like any game could use that I think is
yeah.
really cool. But in the autism mechanic, you know, you've got the sort of there's hyper focus, and that
Mm,
is really good for a little bit, and then it gets not great, you know,
yeah.
and I think it's really interesting how you kind of you do sort of highlight that there can be benefits or advantages to this, but there are also concomitant disadvantages.
Yeah, like I'm autistic myself. I can focus on things like hours at a time and get so much done. And it's great sometimes when I'm working. And then you kind of hit the downfall of that too, which is, you know, I forget that there's other things happening or I can only see the one thing going on. So yeah, there's definitely benefits to it, which could definitely be seen in game two. Like if you're doing, what is it? Like ritual casting and stuff like that. This is actually something I've been meaning to add in. It's like you can do that faster because you can focus on it so deeply. But you also focus on it so deeply that, you know, you might not be super aware of what's going on around you, which is why I think there was like a perception
Yeah, there's
minus to
perception
it. Yeah.
disadvantage, and then I
I'm
think
not
also,
aware of anything else going on when I'm hyper focusing on something.
yeah, I really think that and the ADHD one where you can, you know, you get a bonus if you're doing more things, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because you're really good at doing multiple things at once, and
Yes.
it's a really neat way, I think, to integrate them. I think a challenge for a lot, like I found your stuff because I wanted to play a character that had some mobility issues, and
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I wonder if there's anything mechanically because I was
Mm-hmm.
playing D&D, and you know it's all about the numbers,
Yeah.
and you know, and I found your stuff, and it was really interesting. But um, maybe what are some ways that players and GMs can appropriately, which is not maybe the word that I love there, but can better present disabled characters, NPCs, that sort of thing in games they're running?
I've always said it is always kind of about the intent. Um, I'm hoping to do more. It's a project that we're kind of working on in the background right now. Is a collection of disabled NPCs. I like to create those so that the problem with possibly an able-bodied person creating disabled NPCs if they are not like aware as much about disability is you can accidentally do like harmful stereotypes or play them in a way that would be just harmful representation in general. So creating disabled NPCs allows all of the thought to go into it to create a well-rounded character that is made carefully and intentionally with the disabilities that they have. Um, so that just being very intent about what you're doing and making sure you're doing the research, uh, that is definitely the best way to go about that. As far as playing a disabled character, if you are not disabled yourself, I've always said our mechanics are there for disabled people first and foremost. But as long as you are being respectful and you do your research and you are not playing into, again, the harmful stereotypes or using it to be using your disability as a way to, you know, be, can I swear? I was going to say asshole.
Sure, yeah, go to town.
Okay.
Go to town.
Using your
Nobody watches
disability as an
this, but
excuse to be an asshole or anything like that. Um, so just be respectful, do your research on the disability, and most importantly, listen to disabled people. Like, if they tell you like, hey, this thing that you're doing is not accurate or it's harmful. I keep saying harmful. I just
I mean, not great. I mean, it's just not great.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. So I run a Cthulhu game on stream, and I intentionally made an NPC that had a speech impediment. I do not have a speech impediment myself, and somebody sent me an email and said, "Hey, I love what you do, and it's great that you want to show." You know, just sort of in everyday life, somebody who has a speech impediment, but you're descending into parody, and that's what you don't want to do, you know, because you can it's super easy, especially like I would be very cautious with speech impediments in general because it's super easy to just suddenly become a parody of whatever.
Same thing with like the ADHD mechanics. Like if you don't experience ADHD yourself, and I actually don't, I had other people with ADHD who consulted on this. It's so easy to play into the stereotypes that you see where he's like super distracted, like, oh, look at this thing over here, look at this thing over here. And just all of the harmful stereotypes, like you don't care about things, or you're like completely incapable of getting things done. Playing into those, that's just harmful representation at this point, and it's definitely a point where I would be like, you need to take a step back and like reevaluate what you're doing and like think about why you wanted to play a disabled character if you are not disabled, and like why you felt like you feel the need to do that, and make sure you're coming at it from a place of good intention and not anything like, you know, inspiration porn and shit like that. It's just got to be
I think that's right. I think, you know, it's great to have NPCs that have disabilities show up, just but I think a key, much like any other NPC, is the disability is not what they're about. You know, that's not the reason they're in the game. It's you know, it's almost a side thing. And honestly, in my opinion, and please push back on this, but in my opinion, like I want disabled representation almost to be a second, you know, to be in the background, you know, so that it's just part of the world. There are people that have, you know, mobility issues. There are people that have this and that, and that's not their story, or it's part of their story, but it's not the totality.
Like it is a part of you. It's not their entire personality and everything.
Yeah. So GMs include visible and not visible disabilities, but make sure that it's not, make sure that it's not like the autistic boy that solves all the riddles, you know, like that sort of thing, but use them to show that disabled people exist, you know.
Yeah, you don't need to be like this character who is in a wheelchair and, you know, mention the wheelchair every single time you talk about them. Like you don't need to do that in order for it to be representation.
Yeah, and you know, we were talking before we came on here, and I think it's like I said, it's interesting and I think cool that you are turning this into a mechanics thing, but then, you know, you sort of become beholden. Like I've seen it, and to be clear, folks, Anna is not connected to the combat wheelchair thing at all. But
Sarah's fantastic, but I have not.
Yeah, they're awesome. But you know, I'm sure you get a lot of the same sort of, well, actually, if it only has this many hit points, that, you know, that's like, I'm sure you get plenty of that as well. And and in some ways, creating the mechanics, you know, kind of fuels that, because then the
specific stuff to nitpick.
Yeah. Which is always fabulous. My favorite part of role playing. So how have you seen these tools used at the table?
I mean, I've played most of them myself, and I've played a couple of games with other disabled creators, but I actually don't know specifically how a bunch of other people have using them. I'll get messages sometimes about, how much, they really liked like the ADHD mechanics and how it helps them like explain ADHD to a partner or a friend and like explain it better. But honestly, I try to keep all of the mechanics and such just not overly complicated, because
Yeah.
D&D, I enjoy D&D. I really like D&D. There's a lot to keep track of. And, especially if you're playing a multiply disabled character, it can kind of get a little bit much to try and keep track of everything. So I do try to keep them simple, or offer like within the mechanics, you don't have to use everything. So like at the table, it's pretty easy to use and include. Um, it's never been an issue with any of the games that I've played in, as long as the DM is aware and is being inclusive of that. It's just like another mechanical thing at the table. It's just like adding people who have a whole bunch of feats, and
Right.
you just have a few extra things on your player sheet.
So I love the stress points mechanic. I think it makes sense thematically, mechanically, all these things, and adds a really neat element, I think, to D&D that I would actually, I kind of want to use the stress points thing with able characters,
Yeah,
because
I did build it so it could be used separated from the mechanics.
One of the weird things about D&D is that you can be bathing in the blood of 87 orcs and not have any trauma at all, and not
Yeah,
have,
like
and it has no effect on you emotionally, or unless you role play it as such, and
yeah,
I think stress points are really cool. I could see so many different uses, like, the old story of, the thief trying to pick the lock, and you're like, hurry, hurry, hurry. That's a stress
yeah,
point.
yeah.
How did you come up with, and I know, so um, we'll have a link to Anna's website, but the stress points are essentially for several of the disability mechanics, they're like a counting stat. And so, like, if you have one stress point, you have this effect, and so on and so forth with some of them, and you gain stress points for various different reasons, and that's where, as a GM, I would sort of be like, that's a stress point, and
Mhm.
it's a really cool way to bring, um, I play a lot of Call of Cthulhu, and Call of Cthulhu has sanity as a mechanic,
Mhm.
and now the way that the way they interpret that mechanic is a whole nother discussion about,
Yeah,
a portrayal
I
of
never particularly loved the word they used for it,
yeah, yeah,
but
and I actually, so I change a lot of the mechanics there, but this is a great way. These stress points are a similar way of showing that, your character's going through something that
mm,
is not reflected physically,
yes.
and but could have an impact on other things you're trying to do.
Mhm.
So how did you kind of come up with this stress point idea? I think it's fantastic.
Um, honestly, it came about because I can't remember which mechanic it was for. There's no memory in my brain. So I don't remember which mechanic it was for specifically, but I needed a way to show like how it could increase with, different situational things happening, and how that could make the conditions harder on you at the time. And then I realized that that would work for multiple things. Um, and so I created, it's in a very basic system right now. It's on my to-do list to make it, to kind of develop it more so it can be used separately. It still can be used separately from the disability mechanics, but to develop it a bit more for those who use it outside of the mechanics. Um, but the way that works with the disability mechanics is it's different for each one. If the mechanics include a section on stress points, it will explain this how the stress points work for that specific mechanic, because it's not the same for each one. Like with the POTS mechanics, having multiple stress points, it could make you faint. Like all the stress going on, you're not noticing all of your symptoms. But for like the ADHD, having that many stress points wouldn't make you faint, because that's not the condition. So they're very specific to each one, but the base mechanic is just the stress point system itself. And I just felt that it was like a really simple way to kind of have that element of increasing symptoms and how that could happen, because various like triggers and such for certain ones, in a way that was a simple like 1 to 5, easy to follow and keep track of. And they do include ways that you can decrease your stress points as well, such as resting, taking your medicine if you have that for your specific disability, and stuff like that.
I love that, just getting a hug,
Yes.
because that's such a humanizing thing that, I'm lucky enough to play in a group where like there's hugging going on, but in a lot of D&D groups, hugs would be kind of an afterthought. And so this almost mechanically makes you think about like physical touch and affection and that sort of thing. I don't run a lot of D&D anymore because it's just not my bag, but like I could totally see how you could use stress points in just all sorts of interesting ways, and use them to create because the whole point of hit points is, if my hit points are low, I know I'm in danger, and this is a way of showing that, but mentally and emotionally, not physically. I think it's fantastic. Have you seen stress points being used? Have you played it? You've played in games with stress points, obviously.
Yeah, I've used it myself. I don't have specific feedback from other people who have used it currently.
Well, I'm really interested to see like how neat people can like work it. Like I want to like get you together with like cool other. So one of the things that I'm going to start doing is having 2 GMs here and have a conversation with 2 GMs. And I would love to just watch somebody like B. Dave Walters or Connie Chang sort of bounce their head off of these ideas and how they could play with them, because there's just so many.
The stress point could be pretty easily adapted to other systems because it's just a 1 to 5, and what causes or like what the effects are of having a stress point can change depending on the game. So I think it's pretty flexible that way. Yeah,
I think the old Warhammer Fantasy roleplay had something kind of like that with stress points, but it wasn't. It was different, and it ended in a very retrograde way of you gained an insanity, which is not very very broad and not great in terms of representation there. And so you have a number of different disabilities on there. One thing I notice is that there are, the mechanics of them are all very different. It's not like 8 different ways of cure light wounds or something like that. It's the mechanics are all very different. So what kind of work goes into creating these?
It is a long process that usually starts with me, if it's not a disability that I have myself, and even if it is, just for additional insight, a lot of researching first and figuring out like, hey, what are the core symptoms of this disability, and getting that all kind of in a document. And then from there, I just kind of figure out, okay, so this could lead to this sort of role, or I could do like a roll table for this or this to like see the intensity of the symptoms, like I did with the POTS mechanics, because POTS is so varying, because you could be somebody who faints 20 times a day, or you could be somebody who faints maybe once a month.
And POTS is an acronym for?
Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome.
It was on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, it's a handful. But yeah, every disability is so different that there's just a lot of individual work that has to go in each one, because you can't just like copy and paste over things from the other one and it be the same. Because once I have the base of it and I start writing out just a very, very loose draft of the mechanics, that's usually when I bring in consultants, people who have those disabilities, to look at it and give their thoughts, opinions, insight, or add in. They're amazing every single time. They'll add in things that I never would have thought of. because I don't
because
have
it's
that
their lived
disability. So
experience.
yeah, so they're fantastic. And we go through several rounds of that, just kind of building what eventually becomes the final mechanics, which is then released.
And so, folks, if you go to the website, there's I want to say like 10 different 10, maybe a dozen. There's a great deal on there. But
I should know my content more, but
all in nicely designed PDFs, some good graphic design there. I was very happy to see
crash
that.
coursed in design.
There you go. And they have sort of the mechanics itself, but then also tips for playing it and for ways to integrate it into your game. So I think that's really neat. You mentioned the NPCs, and I think that's a really cool thing that you're doing. You've got several on there already of NPCs who have various, have like disabilities that some are on the list, some are, there's some mobility characters and stuff like that. And that's as you were saying, that's a way of kind of sort of baking in that to the character. And are there, when you're creating an NPC like that, are you sort of giving the GM notes on how to play it? What are you?
The ones that I have up right now do not have that, but that is something I'm hoping to add on and expand on in the future. I do have a project that I talked a little bit about on Twitter. That is going to be just a booklet of disabled NPCs, just from all ranges of where you would find them, from villages to palaces to all of that, and all with very different disabilities, and just various notes on, how to play the disability, what not to do with this specific disability. And so I'm hoping that will be a very good tool for DMs who want to include disabled representation, but don't want to do it poorly,
Right.
or don't feel like they are equipped at the moment to create disabled NPCs themselves in a way that is respectful and accurate.
I mean, I think I go back to what the folks that the folks behind that Native American RPG that I'm totally blanking on, Crow and
I can't remember it.
fudge, totally blanking on the name. But
I know the one you're talking about, but I can't remember the name.
And also Haunted West, when and also Harlem Unbound, when they say, when somebody says, "Oh, I don't feel comfortable telling stories from a Black perspective or from a Native American perspective," and they're like, that's the whole point of this game, is to to tell these stories respectfully. And I think the same thing with disability is that it's everyone watching this, all three of you know someone with a disability. I guarantee it. They are they're everywhere. You may not see it. There are many that are invisible.
The most recent statistic was 30% of the population is disabled in some way, shape, or form. So
we all know.
You definitely know someone.
And so your games as a GM should reflect that. And again, you can do it without it descending into parody. You can, yes. and without it being, this is the crutch kid, that you can have those characters who just, somebody uses a walking stick. It's not, you just, in the character description, just mention that they walk with a limp, and that's all you need to do. But just you can have those characters and you can represent them in your world just like you would characters of different cultures and ethnicities and that sort of thing. It's super important. So you talked a little bit about where D&D Disability is headed, but where do you see this going?
I mean, I hope to just kind of continue to do what I'm doing for now, especially as disability representation and more people who are doing it have been popping up in the TTRPG space. I'm hoping maybe eventually to be able to translate some of these mechanics over to different systems, though right now D&D is the base that I'm working on because it's what I'm most familiar with. And I just want to continue spreading and growing good disability representation instead of some harmful ones pop up every once in a while.
Yeah. It's interesting because, I even think back 10 years ago, and we did not have the awareness of mental health. That it's changed dramatically even in just 10 years. And to your point, that means a lot more people are trying to find themselves in these games. We
Mhm.
all want to see ourselves in these
Yes.
games, and so how do you kind of find that? And this is a great way to do that. I really appreciate the work you've done and the work you're going to keep doing. And I think that you can take these mechanics and you can port them to other games, and you can kind of use them in other games, and have um, have have characters that have these challenges and these opportunities, because sometimes it can be an opportunity, as you were discussing, to go through there. So which of the sort of the ones that the disabilities you have on there, like what are like two of the more interesting ones you think mechanically in terms of D&D that you could see kind of neat weird things happening? I mean, I love, as a GM, not as a person, I love the idea of a character fainting, because I think that just can, like that can add so much to a
It
scene.
definitely, yeah. The POTS mechanics is one of the ones that I am most proud of, because I designed it very specifically for you to be able to create exactly like your experience with POTS for those with POTS who are playing that. Um, and it's also one of the ones I've played the most because I have POTS myself. So that's one of the ones I've played the most, and I will say the fainting, it can be very dramatic. You can end up fainting in like the most dramatic of settings, which is it definitely adds flavor.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's a story that's a story that's a story for a game. And it could also be awesome to have an NPC who has that, where you have an NPC who just faints all of a sudden, and you're like, this happened.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, I see so many, because I'm a GM, I think about it in terms of NPCs, and because I would never tell a player, you've got
Yeah.
this, unless. So I run a home game that's Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and in that game, like you can lose a limb or something like that, and
Yes.
so then maybe these mechanics come into play, um, but NPCs that have these things, and using your mechanics can sort of give me tips for playing those NPCs, and can kind of give me some guidance in terms of how it would impact their everyday life, and how it would sort of interface with the players, since most players see an NPC for like 10 minutes of their entire life.
Can you not have players who get super attached to the one NPC and then the NPC stays there with them forever? Because
I do
I've had
have
my
that.
groups do that quite a
uh,
bit.
I actually have, so in my Cthulhu game, I made a throwaway NPC, the Duchess.
It's always the throwaway NPCs every
This
time.
this horrible, I called her a massive battleship of a woman, but she was just this horrible woman on this, and it became a joke that she was on every boat they got on. Like no matter how small the boat was, the Duchess was on there, and they were just like, no, what? But they all want the Duchess to show up constantly.
Yeah.
It's terrible. Well, you have been very generous with your time. Thank you so much. And what if folks want to get in touch with you and sort of work through things? You've got contact information on your website, but go ahead and just give people your Twitter and stuff like that.
Yeah. Honestly, the best places to reach me would probably be email because I can keep track of that a little bit better, which is DnD Disability at gmail.com. And then I do check Twitter messages, but once they're out of sight, I kind of forget that they exist. But you can message me there, and I will usually within a week or so get back to you. And it is at DnD Disability.
And, pro tip, if you message somebody on Twitter, don't expect a reply, from anybody, because so for this show, that's the main way I contact people is I just see somebody doing something cool and I DM them on Twitter. And if they don't respond, I will like once go like just gently circling back on this. And then if they don't respond, all right, they don't, we're going in different directions. That's cool. Nobody owes you anything, and I think that's an important thing to remember. We all think that we all get dizzy from the world revolving around us, but sometimes it's okay to not follow up with that person if they have not touched base with you. And you can see the website is down there, and the link dnddisability.com. You can find all of the mechanics there. You can buy some cool dice while you're there. You can and
that's a different website, but yeah.
Okay. So there's actually so you have merch. You have D&D Disability merch there.
Yeah, we have some stickers, and a couple of them are charity ones, and then I think I have a few physical copies left of a Guide to Service Mimic scene. But I'd have to double check. I think there's like 5 left.
I checked out the PDF of that. That's pretty. I like that a lot. That's really neat. That's a cool idea. So Anna, thank you so much for joining us. But I'm gonna, I end every episode the same way. So I'm gonna end this one, even though now I want to start this by saying Anna is not the forever GM that I usually talk to on this show. So, these questions are yours to interpret. But so what is a system you would love to run that you haven't run?
I'm trying to think of the ones that I would like to play. That's true, because I'm just not a DM.
Yeah,
not my thing. Probably Thirsty Sword Lesbians.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. It's one of those games that just like knows what it is, and like every mechanic, everything in the game just like uplifts the theme, and it's just I'm a big fan.
I've been watching it for a long time. Like I've read the whole thing like a few times now. It's like this was made for me.
It's pretty fun. Yeah. I think that's a great choice. So we end every episode with the same question, the Space Jam question. Aliens are invading the Earth, and they will destroy the planet where I keep all of my stuff unless you run them a super cool 4-hour game. So what would you do? How would you forestall this? What system do you, or what game do you think would keep them from?
I mean, D&D can take quite a while to get the hang of. And I've also heard that Lancer is pretty complicated to run. But for me, like if I had to run, it would be D&D because that's a system I know, and I have GM'd a couple times. Just because it's so complicated, and like we'd have to make their character sheets. That could take a couple hours in itself. Like
the backstory, just get them to write their backstory. They're never going to get around to defeating it.
Yeah, that, or explain how to do like your ability scores and all of your points once. Don't explain again. Just leave them to figure it out. It'll take them forever.
We've never had someone suggest stalling tactics as the answer to this question. I love it. That's great.
If you're going to stall with anything, D&D is a good choice.
It's true. Yeah. Well, Anna, thank you so much for joining us. And folks, go find Anna's stuff and find cool ways to increase representation in every sense in your games. And we'll see you next time on Keep the Game Moving.
Thank you.